I'm happy to introduce James Kautz, who is a writer, director, actor, and teacher of theater and film. He's also the founder of Red Seed Films, which is an independent film production company whose stories focus on personal transformation, gender, and identity. Welcome, James.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
I'm glad. I can't wait to dive into your films. I just found them so beautifully shot, well acted. The directing was superb. The stories were intense. I was wondering where they were going to go. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that. When I read your bio, I said, wow, quite impressive. I mean, a founding artistic director of the Off-Broadway Theater Company to teaching and directing at NYU, a second-degree black belt. I mean, you write, you direct, you act. Did you always want to write and direct?
Well, first off, maybe after this, you could become my publicist because your enthusiasm is very, very appreciated. I did not always know that I wanted to write and direct. I started as an actor, and honestly, being able to kind of explore my feelings through someone else's words and through, someone else's kind of world was really refreshing for me. And I loved it. And it took me a long time to really kind of amass the courage to consider telling my own stories. I feel very much like I'm a new writer director, and I've have all this work as an actor beforehand. So it's an interesting place to be.
I mean, but your writing is like, I feel like you're meant to be a writer, also an actor and a director. But I mean, the writing and the stories, when we dive into that, they were just, I can't wait to pick your brain to how you came up with these stories. And then also, you were in New York. What brought you to LA?
Yeah. I moved into New York City immediately after high school. I didn't know I was going to be an actor until 4 or 5 months before I graduated high school. I thought I was going to be a painter. That was my first love. And then I've had this kind of crazy old thespian English teacher who kind of was like, we read Shakespeare out loud in class, and he was like, I can tell you like this. Maybe you should consider this. And it was like lightning. I was like, oh, holy shit, that's what I'm supposed to do. And so I moved to New York kind of immediately to be an actor. And I was there for almost 23 years. And I never thought I would leave. But I feel like I kind of hit the ceiling on what was possible. And more than anything, just like quality of life, which I think we don't talk very much about as artists and very driven kind of career-focused people. But quality of life was just a bit lacking in New York, as much as I love it. And so I came out here with my spouse, Morgan, and we went on like a 12-hour hike, and we were like, holy shit, this is nice. You can breathe. And we just tried it. We were ready for something new and different. We had friends here, and obviously the film industry is home here. So it just made sense.
Where did you come from before New York? Where are you from?
So I grew up south of Buffalo. So super blue collar, terrible 8-month-long winters, just I love it. It's beautiful, but a tough environment to kind of survive and make things in.
And New York is so fun and so intense.
Yeah.
California is very different, I would think. I mean, there's a different intensity in LA. People are very driven. It's very spread out and different. And the weather. I mean, who can't beat the weather, right?
Tammy, remind me, are you from here?
I used to live in LA. I did live in LA for 5 years. And then I moved back to San Diego. And then I come up there when I need to.
Gotcha.
So you've written and directed several short films. I just love to dive into your process. I mean, do you write every day? Do you have a journal that you write in? What is your process of writing?
It's an everyday activity for me, and it kind of has to be. I feel very irritable when I don't write. I think, again, the house I grew up in, we didn't really express feelings, but we did make art. And so I find that that is my place to kind of keep my spirit regular and awake, if that makes sense. And so I write every morning. And it's funny, I would say of all the things that I do, writing is probably the most enjoyable. And it's probably my number one passion, which I never would have thought after being an actor for so long.
Well, yeah, and the things you write about. So I'm thinking your genre is psychological dramas. Do you write comedies ever, or is that what do you feel your genre is?
Um, oh God, I feel like if I ever wrote a comedy, it would be like the darkest thing ever. But I should. I mean, I definitely write from a very subconscious place, which sounds kind of cliche, but I don't necessarily know what I'm writing when I set out to do it. I kind of I envy the folks who can sit down and kind of plot out a good, marketable, saleable story before they start writing. I'm definitely not like that. I usually will hear a couple of voices in my head or maybe see an image. Like with The Bottom, I just saw this image of these two men at the edge of this frozen lake, and one was naked and the other was holding a shotgun. And I was like, okay, what is that? Where does that go? And so usually I kind of have to be a bloodhound for my own stories and see what it is that I'm actually wrestling with. And Morgan, who's my spouse and also kind of my creative partner in Red Seed, they are very good at telling me like, oh no, honey, this is really about that relationship you had all those years ago. And I bet you're probably talking about your dad here. And like, they're very good at helping me realize what I'm writing about. But when I set out, it's usually just feelings.
Your stories are very intense. So
Sure.
you're doing a great job with feelings because you're really bringing out the emotion of like almost like you're waking up into this thing. Not articulate with that, but like it's almost like you're like, what the hell? Like, what is going on here? Like, you really bring us in the intensity. I just loved your films. I did. And I want to dive into Frankie. Frankie is your first film. And oh, yeah, that's right. Because you did it in New York, right?
Yep. We shot it in New York. Crazy enough, we finished filming literally like a week before lockdown. Like we were filming on set. We shot it for 2 days in New York, right around Columbus Circle in the basement of this like incredible church. And it was the time when people were like, hey, there's this strange flu going around. Maybe don't go to parties and stuff. And we were like, okay, whatever. And then we almost delayed filming too. And I'm so grateful to the universe and, whatever was looking out for us that we got it shot before everything shut down. But yeah, that was my very first film.
I thought that the acting was so well done. How did you get Richard Mazur?
So thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the movie definitely lives and dies by the performances. And for folks who maybe haven't seen it yet, the film follows this character named Frankie, who has just recently come out as trans, non-binary. And they crash this all men's 12-step meeting. And the whole film kind of deals with the question of like, who gets to take up space? Like, what is a masculine identity? And they kind of fight over whether Frankie is allowed to stay in this safe space for men or not. And so like, it's definitely an ensemble piece, even though it is Frankie's kind of story. The spine of the story is Frankie's. But honestly, just from doing theater for so long, everyone I asked to do it agreed right off the bat. And I was so humbled and honored that everyone agreed to kind of, join my first film. Richard, I had seen in a play. He was friends with one of the other cast members, and I just met with him and I talked to him about the script, and he's very vocal about, supporting 12-step meetings. He's been in program himself, and he was just towering. Like his talent on set, like raised everyone else's game. And Frankie, again, who's played by Morgan, my spouse, they have to go through a pretty terrifying journey. And he was so lovely in kind of making sure that Morgan, the actor, felt safe, while also kind of pushing on them as Frankie, the character. It was really phenomenal. It was really phenomenal and very generous.
Yeah, and I felt like what was really cool about it was an ensemble, and everybody had their part and very different, coming from different places within when Frankie did arrive. some were just like, absolutely not, and then others were like, let's just go on, let's finish this meeting. So I found that really fascinating, the play on and the tension that was coming from all parts as Frankie's trying to, say what she needs to say and stay.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the goal was to create a myriad of kind of the masculine experience in each of the men. There's like the very overt aggressive, there's the kind of super vulnerable, accommodating, and then somewhere in between there's Frankie, and they are, they're masculine as well. They are a part of that world as well.
How many days did it take you to shoot? Because I've also noticed, and I've seen a couple of your films, they pretty much take place in one place. Is that intentional to create that tension where you can't go anywhere and you have to kind of work it out?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm super, super fascinated by, is like, how do we escape situations or prisons of our own making or toxic relationships? And I think the stories have just kind of lent themselves to a single space. I have multiple new shorts in the works, and they're totally different. I'm editing one now where there's like, we went the total opposite way. There's like 40 locations over a 4-day shoot. And it was like ridiculous, but I'm excited to get out of the single space. But we filmed Frankie over 2 days. And the film kind of ends with Frankie's share of Frankie's monologue. And we saved that almost exclusively for the second day. Just kind of give them as much time to feel that,
No, I thought it was really great. So what's your approach when directing actors? Do you want them to keep to the script, to the words that you've written, or do you allow for improv?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, directing actors is my very favorite part of filmmaking. Again, I said at the top, like, sometimes I feel a bit like an imposter. I think it's very easy for directors to feel like imposters because there's so much technical know-how that we just can't possibly know all of. Some directors can, but I think I pride myself on hiring really wonderful experts in their department and trusting them and collaborating with them. And I feel like I'm pretty good at directing actors because I've been an actor for so long. That's my favorite part. Like, when I could just get to that, then I'm like, whew, okay, I know what the hell I'm doing. In terms of sticking to the script, I mean, I put a lot into building the tension, particularly through the dialogue. So I kind of encourage the actors to stick to the script. But I always have like a table read or some sort of a rehearsal beforehand where we have the room to kind of flag something that doesn't really sound natural or maybe feels out of left field. So the script can always kind of change based on the actor's input. On set, I like to stick closer to the script than not. A few words here and there, I think, for flow, it doesn't matter too much.
So maybe just taking a couple steps back in the writing process, you were saying that you get sometimes like a visual, like a guy in a freezing lake naked with another guy with a shotgun. Do you just kind of let the voices call to you as you're writing? You just kind of like sit, like, could you just walk me through a little bit of your flow of writing, like writing Frankie,
Yeah.
Did you, how did you go about finishing the script?
Yeah.
How do you do it? I guess, because everybody works differently. Some people do this elaborate backstory. Some people just go in. I'm a writer too, and I just like to write. So usually I'm just like, I'll write from the script. I don't write from an outline, but sometimes people have their outline and then put it in. What's your process?
Yeah, I tend to start with some sort of a visual. I think it's the painter background. I grew up on comic books too, so I tend to see images first, and then the people in them, and then I kind of. It's weird. It's like I'll just kind of listen for what they're saying, and I'll noodle on it for a long time and just let them kind of talk to each other. And then once they start to get a sense of like, oh, what is each character after? What does each character want? I'll push on that and just like get really curious about that. And usually something really personal for me starts to emerge. For Frankie, it was this need to be seen on one's own terms, and like, kind of the story behind that short. Like, I had entered into an Al-Anon room after kind of a long relationship with a dear friend who struggled with alcohol. I went into this all men's Al-Anon room, and it was so transformative for me. And it was the first time I'd ever been in a space where cisgender men were so open and vulnerable. And at the same time, my spouse was coming out as trans and non-binary. And we had found this kind of commonality of, we had both realized that for a long time we had kind of suppressed who we really were, what we really wanted, because of other people's feelings and fears. And that was a kind of a common thing or commonality that transcended gender. And so I just saw this image of like this person walking into an Al-Anon room that maybe they weren't supposed to be in, and realizing like, okay, well, what would they have to share? How would these people respond to them being in the room? And I just wrote just lots of bad drafts over and over. And then you just kind of chisel away at like, okay, they can play this, they don't need to say this, or like, why is everyone agreeing? Like, how do we get maybe some more conflict in? And you just kind of funnel it down and whittle it down. But usually it's starting with an image, figuring out who these people are in the space and what they want, and kind of making it as hard as possible for them.
Yeah, it's building that tension. That's the challenge, because sometimes, when one writes, it can be almost feels a little generic, or, one beat. And then you have to go, okay, but what's the deeper? What's really going on for this person? What do they really want to get? What are they not saying? What are they saying but not saying, or saying but they're meaning something different? There's so many complexities to, writing dialogue and stuff. Sometimes I feel like it's easier to write the description than it is okay, what is the voice, and making sure that all the voices aren't the same.
And I really marvel at certain writers who can set out and say, like, I want to write about this theme or this dramatic question or this topic. And I'm just not like that. I kind of work the other way, where I'll write something that means so much to me, and then afterwards I kind of have to step back and say, like, oh, this is really exploring power, or this is really exploring like what happens, to marginalized people under capitalism, or like those big things that I could never set out consciously to make.
On that, do you have a group of people that you have read your script? What's your process to the completion? Because I know, if anybody ever said that this is version 1, I'd be like, oh, you need to go back and rewrite some stuff, because version 1 is never the one that you should be filming. So, but after so many revisions, when do you feel like, okay, I'm gonna give it to, and do you have a set couple of people that you send it off to? What's that process to completion?
It's grown over the years in a lovely, lovely way. I have an actual writing mentor that I work with every other week, where I share pages with. I have a community of producers now that I've made work with, folks that I trust, and of course Morgan, where, I would say the one thing I have definitely learned, not like the hardest way, but the hard way too, is like, you only get that much time to make sure the script is ready. Like, you can't really fix it while you're in production, no matter how smart you think you are, or how good your actors are, or how beautiful the shot you have composed in your head is. Like, it has to be on the page. Because the stakes are just too high and it's too expensive. And, you can't go back. So I've found that the more people that can read it, that you trust, the better. And like, you kind of get to a point, I think, pretty organically where, the notes that come back aren't so big. And like you listen for like, oh, everyone's kind of giving me the same kind of version of this note. Or, only one person thinks this, but 4 or 5 don't really see that. And then having like a really strong creative compass and kind of internal compass of like, well, what resonates and what doesn't, with proposed changes. Like that can be hard too. But I think, you get to a place where, no, this is as much as I can do, and now it needs actors.
Let's dive into the bottom.
Cool.
You wrote, directed, you starred in as well, revealed a lot of yourself.
Almost everything.
Almost everything, yes. So I was kind of curious, like, was it hard to be naked the entire film? Now, at first I was thinking, geez, he had to be naked the whole thing. And then I'm like, well, probably in a close-up he was wearing pants or something. It wasn't like he was naked the whole time they were shooting it. Definitely the wide shots.
Yeah.
And it looked freezing out.
It was freezing.
One, where did you shoot this? And then how was it really revealing yourself in this film?
Yeah, so we filmed south of Buffalo at kind of the tail end of winter. So it was cold as hell. We got to set at like 3:30 a.m., 4 a.m. so we could kind of catch the dawn. And so we were out there probably at the coldest part of day. And for those who haven't seen the bottom, the story follows these, you're not quite sure what the relationship is, but these 2 men kind of at the edge of this frozen lake and this kind of in these trees. And my character, a character named Jude, is completely naked and is kind of being driven back into the water by this other person who's holding a shotgun. And it's kind of this back and forth mind game of like, who's to blame, who's at fault, why is this happening? And then there's kind of this weird twisted reveal at the very end. We filmed in cold, because I didn't want to try to cheat the world being frozen. I prepared so hard for the actual plunge into the icy water. I was polar plunging every single day. I loved it. It's weird. It was like ice baths every day. I jumped in Erie Lake and I was naked on set for pretty much the entire day. And that was the easier part in a strange way, not to sound like all foofy actor, but like the emotional stuff was far harder. We had a very small crew, which was really nice. The same DP who shot Frankie, Tommy Agriodemos, he shot all of our films. I love him. He just knows how to capture things, especially with me being in front of the camera. Morgan co-directed it, so I really kind of trusted Morgan to like make sure that we were hitting all of the right emotional notes. So I felt very safe, believe it or not, being that exposed. And then we had a person on set, a dear friend named Mike Tubman, who was there with like towels and stuff to make sure that I didn't freeze once I went into the water and everything. But it was a crazy one.
And then, so how did you come up with the story? I mean, you saw it in your head, but then how did it evolve?
Yeah, so
into what it became.
So, like I said, I saw these 2 men at the edge of this lake, and I started just kind of hearing what they were saying to each other and just kind of kept pushing on it. And it kind of eluded me for a long time. I was like, what is their relationship? What is happening? And I realized, like, the deeper I got, I was like, oh, this is kind of a metaphor for an intervention of sorts. Like, this is a dark intervention about hitting bottom in a relationship. And like when one person in your life hits bottom, you kind of decide, like, do I keep them in my life? Do I not? What is that relationship like? And you kind of look up to find, oh, there's a lot of people in my life that I have this relationship with. It's not just one person. It's hard to kind of describe without giving the entire film away, but
yeah,
that's what I realized. Similar in many ways thematically to Frankie, where it's kind of this intense journey towards recovery of the soul, recovery of the spirit.
Yeah, no, it was really well done. I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
What's going on here? And
my
the
white
reveal at the
naked
end that I won't say anything.
yeah. Well, and just my white
Yeah.
naked body shivering out in the coals for 8 minutes.
Yes. I was like, and we were working together, so I was like excited to then be able to talk to you on set
Yeah.
about that. But yeah. So, what is your typical budget for your films like? And then how do you go about funding them? Are you fully funding them, or do you get other people to contribute? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I find honestly, this is kind of the number one question from everyone who, asks advice on how to make films. Like, where does the funding come from? I think it's certainly the hardest part of all of this. I've never crowdfunded for our films. That to me seems like a lot of work, and I think you can only kind of do it once. I, of course, put in some of my own money. I think every filmmaker does, whether they think they're going to or not. But I just make personal asks and like actually have grown a very loyal, steady base of executive producers. Shorts can be made cheaply in the grand scheme of things, but I also think like it's very expensive to be cheap. A filmmaker that I respected so much and respect so much. I picked his brain before making Frankie, my first short. And he was like, you could make something for like $1,000 or $1,500, but to really be competitive and to really like stand out and go to the festivals that you want to go to, James, he's like, you need to invest at least 10 grand in something. Like you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it on screen. Unless you're one of those people who owns your own camera or you have just incredibly talented friends who will work for free. Every one of our shorts, the bottom we made for around 8 to 10 grand. Frankie was around 20 to 25. Our other ones are somewhere in between there. And I'm very proud of that. I think they look like films that I know others have made for 40, 50, 60. Like it can be very expensive. But I think, from my years of raising money, making theater, I've learned that asking people to participate in ways that are exciting for them as financiers, as executive producers, as producers, we need them. And there is value for them participating in our films. I think we as filmmakers think they're doing us this great favor and we shouldn't ask. But they get value out of giving as well. And I think we need to remember that too. It's very easy to forget that.
What are some of the perks that they get? Because you kind of alluded to that. Like, what are some, could they be in it? Like, what kind of perks do you give them?
They could be naked at the lakeside.
Exactly.
10 grand. No. I think being ambassadors for the work and attending film festivals and being a part of the face of the film is what I think most donors and investors want when it comes to short films. Short films don't make money. Very few do, and when they do, it's not lucrative in any way, I don't think. So, it's an investment. It's an investment in a filmmaker that, will eventually make a feature that they can invest real money in and potentially see real return on. I think more than anything, though, it's having your name in those credits, being able to go to an incredible festival, a destination festival, and being able to tell wonderful people in a room that like, hey, that movie you just saw, I helped to make that. Like, I think that's the cachet. And, finding people, I wouldn't ask someone who only makes like juvenile comedies to fund my work necessarily, unless they really liked me. Finding people who align with your mission, your vision as well.
Yeah, I totally understand that. You're a director and an actor, and sometimes you act in your films. And directing and acting, it wears different hats. I was just curious, like, how do you decide when you're going to be in your own film and when you're not? Is it that the character is you? Do you write for you in the character, or how do you make those decisions?
I'll be honest with you, I never imagine I'm going to act in anything that I write. I just assume that I'm going to be behind the camera. With The Bottom, we filmed it during COVID, and I was, the character needed to be naked and plunge in freezing water. And I was like, who owes me a favor? Who would actually do that? And I was like, I don't know if I can ask that of anyone. And then I started realizing I kind of want to do that. So I had never planned on playing the character until it was kind of starting to become a reality. I found that I've gotten a lot more acting work from friends as I make my own films. And that kind of contents me. I don't imagine myself usually in my own stuff, but maybe that'll change.
Yeah. I was just always curious because some people are writer directors, they're director actors and writers probably too. How do you, that would be a lot to then act in it. You have to memorize lines, plus you have to direct everybody and make sure that you're in the mood, but also remember your lines. And if you're the main character, I don't know how people do it, but I think so.
I think it's a slippery slope though too. Like I think you need some checks and balances on the outside. Like Morgan co-directed The Bottom because I needed someone to see if it was working, let alone see if the framing was right. I think otherwise it can become a vanity project and not a story that really truly needs to be told in the same way. Not all the time, but I think that's the danger when you don't have those kind of artistic checks and balances on set.
I can't wait and then I just saw your most recent film. That was pretty intense too. They're all intense, man. Yeah. So do you have a feature? Are you because a lot of these could actually be feature films. It is a nugget in a whole life that you're I was curious, what led that person to here? So are you thinking about writing a feature or in the works of writing a feature?
We're actually in the early development stages of a feature that was grown out of the short film Frankie. So it follows Frankie and Cam as they kind of attempt to escape this rural town. And yeah, our goal is to film in September of next year. I'm talking to a couple of really fantastic producers trying to figure out what the budget would actually be. And it's a real undertaking. I remember a friend told me short films are art, feature films are business, or it's a business plan or something akin to that. And
right.
I like that. I think it's a smart way to look at it because there is just so many moving parts and it requires so much money.
I can't wait to see it because that's a story that I haven't seen being told unless I'm just missing the films that do tell that story. But that would be a very interesting to see the perspective of all people, because, you have the spouse that cisgender and then transgender. I would think that both would be going through their own metamorphosis in, is this relationship going to stay together because of this change? And can it?
Yeah.
And then how do you navigate that? I just think, wow, that would be a very interesting story. I would love to see.
I can't wait for you to see it. I can't wait to make it.
Wait.
And the heart of it, I think what makes our story a bit different also is that it's not Frankie's transition that's the hard part for that relationship. They love each other. It's all of the surrounding life circumstances that make any relationship hard. How do we pay for this? I want to go this direction in my life and you want to go the opposite direction. How do we navigate those things? And one person just happens to be transitioning genders. I think we're very excited to tell that story as opposed to a story where someone's gender transition is the obstacle. That's not this story.
I like that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so going to be so fun. And do you have any 5-year goals?
Yeah, this feature is no matter how you slice it, it's a 2+ year process. I've written one that's a bit bigger in scope, bigger in budget. I'm writing a pilot I would love to get to a place where, I'm making my work with the people I love and care about on something of a bigger scale. But I'm happy. I'm happy with kind of where we're at creatively. And if we can find a way to just kind of keep doing that for the rest of our lives, that to me feels like the goal. I don't want to direct like a Star Wars movie or anything. It's these stories, and maybe pay our rent a little easier with it.
I love it. I love it. So any last thoughts for our viewers?
No, just, this is a war of attrition. So just keep plugging away a little bit every single day. I've listened to most of the podcast episodes that you've made. And it's incredible. And kind of that resiliency of art makers, it feeds my soul, and I'm grateful to be a part of that.
Well, thank you so much, James, for being on the show. I mean, and sharing, and I just can't wait to see where you go in the future.
Same.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @Tammy Magaro. Until we meet again, what's your story?